always had good friends around and animals, and I showed horses since I was 10 years old.
You know, I think attitude has a really great impact on how able you are to enjoy life.
You know, growing up, I always felt really supported. I was lucky.
My parents were very good to us. They were very caring and laid back.
My kids are there, my kids are happy, and their joy brings me joy.
I see things differently now because of my emotional growth. Drugs or not, you're still the same person.
Hey guys, Sky Tikkanen here today. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about addiction, what it is, what it isn't. I'm a substance abuse counselor. I've been working in the field for about a decade. In addition to that, I do some policy work around substance abuse issues. And I'm also in recovery for 14 years from heroin addiction. I bet you thought that we were going to tell you about how bad drugs are or teach you about different drugs. We're not going to do that. We're going to teach you about addiction, and I think that's something that we can all agree is a bad thing. When we first started this project, we were in a room of really important people, and we were all talking about how to stop the opioid epidemic, how to get young people to understand how serious it was. And what we realized was that nobody in that room had the power to do that. You guys do. So we're going to teach you a little bit about how you can help and what you can do about this. So I know how my addiction got started, but addiction doesn't discriminate, and it affects people from all different walks of life. So today we wanted to show you a group of different people, and they'll tell you how they got started using.
Starting at the age of 12, I started socially party drinking on the weekends and smoking some weed, and then through high school, partied a little bit more maybe than your average high school kid would. Began hanging out with people that drank and smoked a lot too, and got into a really bad relationship. So I just started drinking a lot. Every minute I wasn't working, I was drinking. And then in the midst of all of that, I met the next guy that I thought was for sure the love of my life. And 6 months into our relationship, he introduced crack to me, and that spiraled out of control. And in the midst of that, he started abusing me physically, emotionally. It was terrifying.
I started using drugs and alcohol at a young age, probably 13 years old, and it's something that escalated through the years until I was, you know, through my early 20s, and you know, I started with marijuana, and I continued with opiate drugs, experimented with psychedelics and all kinds of other stuff, and by the time I was 21 or 22 years old, I was physically dependent on opiate drugs, OxyContin specifically. And you know, I was still employed, and I was still, you know, able to keep a job and you know, be somewhat functional. And so this kind of played into my delusion that this wasn't a problem.
I started using when I was probably 15 or 16. Before using, I played a lot of sports. I had really good grades, kind of life going on track, you know, a lot of good friends. And then I started smoking marijuana at age like 15, 16, drinking a little bit. And then when I was 18, after graduating, just a couple months after graduating, I had to have like a really major surgery done. And they put me on painkillers. And so that was like the first time I really experienced pills at all. So I was definitely overusing them, maybe without knowing it at the time. And I ran out not only, you know, earlier than I should have, but pretty abruptly. And so then I was like, I need more. And so I was reaching out to friends, and probably on and off for like 2 or 3 years after that, I was using painkillers, marijuana, and drinking a little bit.
I was addicted to opioids, and I believe that started because back in I think my sophomore year, I got mono, and I was put on tramadol to help with sleep and pain. It said 1 every, whatever, but sometimes I would take 2 because I would just want to, like, go to sleep because I was so miserable because mono was terrible. So I think that's what started it without me even knowing. One night I got into a really big fight with my boyfriend, and I I texted one of our friends, and I knew he smoked Percocets, Perc 30s, and I was like, hey, like, let me try that, because all I would hear about all the time from everyone, seems like everyone in this county was on it, is how awesome it was, and like, I forgot about everything, and that's what I wanted, because I was mad, and I didn't know how to emotionally handle what was going on, and I didn't even know what was going on. I just knew I was mad and whatever,
I did not really start dabbling into drug use until I was in high school. Once I got started smoking weed in freshman year, that kind of was where it just was smoking weed. It was what it was. I never really bought it or anything like that, but just when it was around, sometimes I did smoke it. That kind of worked up into like adulthood, where I'm 18, 19, living on my own, not with my parents anymore, not regulated by rules of anyone. This is where like partying, I would say, comes into play for me.
So if you know anything about addiction, you've probably heard of this idea of rock bottom. And in the recovery community, we say that rock bottom is whenever you decide to stop digging. The people in the video here will tell you about their rock bottoms and when they decided to stop digging.
It spiraled out of control really fast. I didn't start using heroin until May of 2012, and then I overdosed on August 17th, 2012. And that's when my family and my friends found out that I'd been using heroin. I went to rehab, and at that point in time, we thought that it would cure me because we didn't know absolutely anything about addiction and what it entailed. And I was in intensive inpatient in Michigan for 6 weeks. And the entire time I was there, I was planning my relapse and still in contact with my ex. And 2 hours after I got home, I snuck out and got high again. The next couple months were an absolute mad spiral of stealing, lying, just doing anything I could to stay high and to stay with my ex.
In 2009, I was 22 years old. I got arrested for driving under the influence and a variety of other drug-related stuff. And so I was not prepared for this. This was a shocker to me. And so immediately I started going to treatment. I got a lawyer, and my lawyer said, you just got to stop using drugs. You've had your fun. And at the time, I didn't really understand, and looking back, he didn't really understand either. But that is what I had to do. But it wasn't that simple for me. And so I started going to treatment, and I went to an outpatient clinic, and I showed up, and I kind of wanted to change my life, but I wasn't really committed to going all in. Let's say I wasn't really committed to changing my life all the way.
So then probably like 22, 23 is kind of when I started like experimenting with harder drugs. I started using like Molly and acid and Coke, and probably did that for like 2 years. So from then on, I started taking just like Klonopin, but then I got introduced to Xanax, and I ended up mixing Xanax, Klonopin, hydrocodone all together. It got to the point where I was using anywhere from like 20, 30 pills a day for like months. And I mean, I went on like vacations that I don't remember. I woke up on the top of like parking ramps, just like passed out. So then in summer, it was August 2015, I ended up overdosing. I think I took over 40, maybe 60 pills that day. I got to the hospital and like, I don't remember a lot. I barely remember the ER room. But I remember being in there for like 3 days, and I was like a mess. I was horrible to my friends, horrible to my family. I made a nurse cry. They had like police officers stationed outside my room for, you know, a couple days. And I know that, like, if I would have just gone home and gone to bed, like, I would not have woken up.
I met this guy, and we decided that we should move out together, and we were both heroin addicts. I was, like, you know, withdrawing and sick, and I just remember laying there, and I was like, okay, I gotta go home. And that was, like, this close to my rock bottom. So then I came home here, and I was sober for, like, 2 weeks, and then I immediately went back to shooting it again. And my rock bottom was when I went out to my trash can that had been sitting on the side of the road for like probably 4 days, and I dug through my trash to find my needle so that I could shoot up again.
About 20 years old, I met who is now my ex-husband. And I would say with that same young mentality, I was exposed again to opiates at a stronger dose this time, and Oxycontin. Turns out, like I said, he was exposed to opiates at a young age, was using them with alcohol at a young age, even younger than myself, and was still kind of into that, okay, where then we both, after talking with each other over several months, are exposing how we, you know, both enjoy doing that. So when we start again, and then that kind of all in very short amount of time spiraled off into, you know, bad heroin addiction, you know. And we actually committed a lot of crimes during that time, still trying to support our heroin addiction. This is what, for me, when crimes first started happening for me, when I lost my jobs because of drug addiction and stealing from jobs, stealing from people at my jobs because of easy access to money. That turns into stealing from people you don't know, stealing from my parents, who I would never steal from, people who I would never steal from, my friends, who don't want to be around you anymore at this point because you're stealing from them every time you're there, or you're high every time you're there, you know?
Addiction's known as a family disease because it doesn't just impact the person that's using. It impacts people's family, their friends, their coworkers, their teachers, everybody. If you've known anybody that's ever struggled with active addiction, it's probably impacted you.
A lot of people were suspicious of what I was doing with my life, and they had an idea that something was going on, but through recovery and through this process, I had to share this with a lot of people that I wasn't willing to do before. I wasn't willing to ask for help, and I wasn't willing to, you know, to share kind of what was going on with my life with even my family members, you know, my close friends.
My ex and I were homeless at the time. We stayed at the Y, going to the point where I'm now in jail for even 30 days was like a slap in the face for me. My parents told me, did you commit, as I'm calling from jail for the first time, did I commit the crime that I'm in jail for? And I said, yeah. And they said, okay, we'll see you when you have court. And they did not bail me out. My bail was $300. My parents had $300, and they were good parents, and they knew what they were doing, and they knew that if I got bailed out, I would go do the same thing. Just keep repeating the same cycle.
My mom struggled with it really bad because, you know, she thought it was her fault, and so did my dad, and like, there's so much confusion about addiction. No one can really make anything of it, not even addicts, you know, so it's hard, and everyone comes to different conclusions and different solutions, and my mom had to be put on medication because like her anxiety was so terrible because I overdosed 9 times. And so she didn't know whether it was going to be me calling to say, you know, hey, I made it through today, or someone else calling and saying, hey, your daughter passed away.
It hit us like a ton of bricks when she went into the hospital the first time with heroin overdose, because we had no idea. So that was a huge shock. We did not see it coming?
No, not at all.
I didn't know what to do or how to feel. I was literally, I couldn't hardly think of what to do.
I was furious. Hurt, embarrassed. Walk around with knots in your stomach 24 hours a day, waiting for the next call. What's it gonna be? What is it? You know, the begging, the
Threatening.
It was just
The deal making, you know, just the constant. The phone would ring and your heart would just stop because you just were expecting it to be that phone call that said she's gone.
But it all came crashing down just as it always does. My parents put me on the streets. Enough is enough.
she's done controlling our lives. It's not gonna happen anymore. And I made the decision, and it was the hardest thing I ever did. I said, she's not coming back in the house till she gets stuff together. By making that decision, there's times she showed up, rain and cold, whatever, and I turned her away. I said, nope, you're not coming in here. I mean, I didn't let her know, but I went back to the room and cried. Because that was my daughter that I just said no. But I had to, for us, for the family.
Growing up, my mom was addicted to opiates. She passed away when I was 15 years old due to an overdose. And it's affected my life greatly. I believe she got addicted was because of her doctor prescribing the medication. I know she was on Oxycontin and was on oxycodone. And also at the time too, she was being prescribed benzos, Xanax. Right after lunch, I went to my German class and sat down, got all settled in, and the principal came in and was looking straight at me. And I was confused because I never got in trouble, so I didn't know why the principal wanted to talk to me. And so he asked me to grab all my stuff, and we walked to his office, and I swear that was like the longest walk ever. I got into the principal's office, and my grandma was bawling, and I asked her what happened. And she said that my mom had passed away. So I had to call my brother. And I called him, and he had to put me on hold because he was in the middle of lunch hour. And the longest time, like being on hold, felt like forever. And he got on the phone, and I told him that Mom had died, and just hearing his voice and hearing him like scream through the phone, that was just horrific. I don't ever want to hear that again. And then after that, my grandma and I got her stuff, and we headed to my house to say goodbye to my mom. And that was just weird. Pulling up, the coroner said to both my grandma and I that we shouldn't go see her just because of how she looked. And that was hard. It was just a surreal experience.
So there's lots of things that can put you at risk for addiction. And when I'm telling you about these things, what I want you to do is, if you've ever been worried about somebody that you're friends with or somebody that you care about, think about whether or not these things impact them. So the first thing that puts you at risk for addiction is just your genetics. 40 to 60% of your risk for addiction comes from whether or not your parents or your grandparents or your aunts and uncles ever struggled with substance use. The next thing is if you have a co-occurring mental health disorder, something like anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder. Then there's chronic pain issues. If you're in pain all the time, you're more likely to become addicted. Finally, there's this thing called adverse childhood events, and this has been studied a whole lot. So if you have 4 or more of these adverse childhood events, your risk for addiction goes up by 50 to 66%. Did a parent or other adult in your household swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt?
There were times when, you know, my father and my mother were upset with me, and I was sworn at. I mean, I don't, you know, I guess that's normal to me, normal-ish.
I definitely had adults in my life who definitely, like, while they were intoxicated, would, you know, swear and yell, and, you know, like, I was afraid sometimes.
Did a parent or other adult in your household push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured?
There was one occasion, yes, and I think it was mostly because of intoxication, frankly. I think overall I had a very loving family. They did the best they could, and I had a generally good childhood, but yeah.
Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touched their body in a sexual way? Try to or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal sex with you?
So when I was 14, I was sexually assaulted by my stepfather. So that definitely changed my life, you know, sent me in a whirlwind, especially being so young. I wasn't using at the time, but definitely played a part in my using, I guess you'd say.
Did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Did you often feel like you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had nobody to protect you? Were your parents too drunk or high to take care of you, or to take you to the doctor if you needed it? Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Was your mother or stepmother often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Sometimes or often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or knife? Did a household member ever go to prison? Did you ever live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic, or who used street drugs?
My family history of addiction is, I'd say, extensive. You know, I have family members that have struggled, and some of them didn't make it, and some of them are doing well and doing great, and they've had the opportunity to find recovery. But yeah, my family does have addiction.
Definitely, you know, family history. My family, a lot of people in my family struggle with addiction. My dad drank a lot. My mom drank a lot. I knew at a certain age that my mom smoked too.
Being exposed early to alcoholism definitely probably played a role as to, and marijuana use, I would say, you know, played a role into how I viewed drugs. So you're under this impression that it's okay with all of the drugs to do this.
Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide?
I have a close family member that has manic depression, and I think that it's very well managed now, but that may have been a different story earlier in their lifetime.
Unfortunately, my family doesn't really talk about a lot. You know, my immediate family they struggle with like depression and anxiety, and it's a very vague term, but you know, I feel like it's definitely there for my family.
Mental health does play a role in the alcohol use within my family, and I believe those two are partnered. There's a couple different people who have the same mental health issue. That part runs in my family, and that's schizophrenia. You know, I come to realize now they use alcohol, they use smoking weed to cope with their mental health issue that they're not dealing with on the side over here.
So when people become addicted, sometimes we think that there's never going to be anything else for them. But that's not true. Recovery is a reality. And in every successful recovery, you need the consequences that motivate people to get into recovery, but you also need the good stuff, the hope, the positive things in life that keep you moving forwards.
I was sentenced to a year in Sauk County, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. So about halfway through my sentence, I found out that I was going to be an aunt. And I will never, ever forget getting that phone call. And I knew it was over. Before that, I was pretty sure that I was gonna be done using. I really wanted to stay clean and to keep my family. But when my brother told me that, it was done, because I had to be in his life.
Through the drug court program here in Dane County, who kind of kept me accountable, and you know, they kind of gave me a deal that if I would show up there and go through kind of their process and take drug tests and go to treatment, that they would not send me to jail, basically. And I was excited about that, you know, so I gave it a shot. It wasn't a short journey for me, and it wasn't an easy change, and I had to learn a lot of things about myself and the people around me. And so I've been sober for 5.5 years or so.
I think 2 days after I got out of the hospital, I went to see my therapist, who I'd been seeing for a while, but I was never honest with her about my using. So when I went and saw her, she was like, here's treatment centers, this is what we're doing session, you are calling them. And that's when I called Connections, and I was willing to at least go there and try it. So when I got there, I was terrified. I remember when Crystal came out the first time, I was just about to pick my stuff up and run, just kidding.
He's a pretty insightful person, naturally had many strengths, but really struggled with depression and overall pretty isolated. Once he found recovery, he really found his voice and was able to be open and honest with the people in his life in a way he never has been able to. And because of that, the people in his life were able to support him like they maybe haven't before.
Along with Crystal, I would say really listening to the people in the group and hearing people who had a year plus sober, how their lives had just changed completely drastically, and in ways that I didn't think were possible for me. You know, I was okay, I'll try this, maybe a month, maybe 2. And then at 3 months sober, things really started changing for me. I got a job, which was the first job I had had in a year.
I attend therapy. It's not traditional therapy though. It's more modern, and she made it worth my time because I've been in so many other therapists and stuff like that, so many, and none of them worked for me. I was ugh, I can talk to my friends and get the same, you know what I mean? But she made everything clear, so I could understand, so I could map out in my brain, okay, this is because of this, you're feeling this because of this, and it just made sense, and it gave me hope because I finally understood what on earth was going on. Because now, am I still put in some situations that I was back then? Oh, for sure. They don't go away. The world doesn't stop. But now, because I have the emotional skill set, because of my therapist, I can now deal with that safely, calmly. I know what to do. I know how to handle myself. And even in situations I didn't know how to before.
So when I was a teenager, I was really confused because I was pretty smart and I could tell when I was making a bad choice, but sometimes I just made bad choices anyways. I couldn't understand why I did that, and then I learned about brain development. We have 2 parts of our brain, right? One is your prefrontal cortex, which is your part of your brain that tells you math equations and makes really good decisions and analyzes things. And then there's our limbic system, and our limbic system is our animal part of our brain that is impulsive and keeps us alive and does lots of fun stuff. When we're born, both parts of our brain kind of grow together until we're around 3, and then for a while, our limbic system grows a little bit bigger. So those terrible 2s, terrible 3s are all about that impulsive part of your brain being a little bit bigger then. Then everything evens out and we're growing along together again until you're around 12 or 13. And then all of a sudden, that limbic system gets bigger again. You get real impulsive, and sometimes you make bad choices even though you know that they were a bad choice. That continues until you're 25. So at 25, your prefrontal cortex gets bigger than your limbic system, and it stays that way for the rest of your life. But when you're a teenager, you are more impulsive. I'm telling you all this because it actually really matters when you first start to use something. In Wisconsin, there's probably a lot of alcohol use that you've seen, maybe even that you have experienced. And that is a part of Wisconsin culture, undeniably. Wisconsin is a place where people drink. But if you drink when you are younger, that limbic system, that part of your brain that's impulsive, is going to stay bigger than your higher functioning prefrontal cortex for a lot longer. When you start to use actually really matters. So the later that you start to use anything, the more protected you are against addiction.
When you first start doing it, it's like, oh, this is really helping me escape my problems, and I can just do this every day. And then like you try and recreate the first time you ever did it, and then after a while it's like, oh, well, this isn't really helping my problems too well anymore, but I still like have to do it or else I'm gonna, you know.
If they don't do drugs and they have a friend that does drugs, probably the biggest thing is to let them know that it's not okay. Like, don't let them pressure you into doing it too, because depending on the drug, if you get started, you're gonna get sucked into that too.
There's never words you can say to like, oh, it's all better now, but just being there to hold someone's hand or give someone a hug when they need it and answer a phone call when they want it.
Keep the open communication. I think just talking about it and talking positively about it is huge, because chances are there's someone sitting around them that needs somebody to talk to and needs empathy and needs open support.
Not only to be open with them and talk to them about, you know, maybe even bother them a little bit about their drug use if it's something that you're concerned about, even if they don't react well. Just watching out for general wellness, I think.
When I was a teenager and after I'd already started using, my dad said something pretty brilliant to me that I wish he would have told me before I'd started using. He said that if I was to use drugs, that maybe I'd make it out of it, but that I'd have friends that died, because he had friends that died. I did end up having friends that died. I had people that I really cared about and really loved that overdosed and passed away, and it was really, really hard. I don't want that for you. This opioid epidemic that we're in the middle of is everybody's problem. It's in every corner of Wisconsin. It has affected your community. It's probably impacted your life in some way. So now that you know the risk factors, now that you know how people get into recovery and how people get help, and now that you know what you can do, if you see that kid in school that you know is at risk, that the kid that might be the outcast, that maybe got labeled as a bad kid early on but isn't really a bad kid, invite that kid with you to the movies or to a soccer game, to a football game. Don't ever be with that kid when they're using. We don't ever want you to put yourself at risk. But if you can invite that kid over to your house for dinner, you might just save them from addiction, and you might just save them from overdosing.
This program is made possible with generous support from the Relo Family Foundation. Driftless Recovery Services, Aurora Healthcare, the SC Johnson Company, Skyward Education Software, and the M&I Foundation.